All right. Well, hello, my name is Donna, and on behalf of all the Barnabas chapters, thank you so much for being on our online training today with Michael Wilkes. And the topic today is assessing and addressing growth pains in your organization. Let me just give a brief biography on Michael and then and open us with a word of prayer. So Michael has 30 years of experience in management and strategic organization development, including roles in business leadership, management consulting, and board governance. He is dedicated to assisting organizations in transition who are often challenged with managing and sustaining their growth. Currently, serving as president CEO of Master Graphics while also committing time to consult with church and nonprofit leaders. Um, who seek a coach or comrade as they navigate their organization's most challenging transitions. So let me just open us in a word of prayer and hand it over to Mike. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for this time where we can just gather and just receive training from people like Mike who are experienced and who are able to just serve us with their time and talent, Lord. I just pray, Father, that no matter the size of our organizations, that God, that you would allow us to just really assess and honor our organizations through assessing our growth and just addressing any issues that we might have as organizations, Lord. So may we just truly just honor you in all that we do and during this time, God, and as we work with our organizations that you have blessed us with. So I pray all these things in your son's precious name. Amen. All right, Mike, handing it off to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Okay. All right. Well, since I am new to this online type of presentation, be sure and let me know if I'm being clear enough or too quiet or too loud. But we'll just go ahead and jump right in since I know time is of the essence to everybody. Uh-oh. There we go. Just to let you know, a lot of this presentation comes from a book called Corporate Life Cycles and came out a number of years ago. And there might be some terms in here like corporate or sales or something that may not totally correlate to a nonprofit or a church, but in my experience, whether it's a large corporation, a small business, a nonprofit, or a church, there's one common denominator, and that's people. And the more people that are being managed, and as an organization grows, the dynamics change. I mean, even Moses and the disciples had those issues as they started needing to manage differently as their people grew. So I just wanted to give that as a caveat. And here's some other resources on there that are more church-oriented, but obviously this is not all my ideas. And you already mentioned my experience, so I don't need to go through that, but I did serve on a elder board and was for 9 years of a very large church, and as we were going through a policy governance change, so a lot of experience with that. And I've been working with churches and nonprofits ever since, beside the business world. So just jumping right in, what we're really going to be talking about is understanding an organization's life cycle. Why do you need to know that? So that you can prevent and better deal with problems as you grow, because organizations develop very much like people do. There's regular growing pains that just kind of, as you go through a certain stage, I'm not saying they're easy, but they're normal. You understand these are just normal growing pains. And then there are abnormal problems, things that you should really be aware of, that if that's happening, it should be addressed immediately. When you have you have a child and they cry a lot, won't sleep very long, wet their pants, obviously that's a very normal growing pain or challenges if they're 6 months old. If they're 16 years old, that's not so normal, and you need to be aware of that. That's a different set of problems. So that's why it's important to understand an organization's life cycle, because certain issues are very normal. They're difficult, but they're very normal. But you need to be aware of those that are abnormal that need immediate attention. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So realizing that a lot of the problems are just due to the situation, not a specific individual. And you need to focus on those challenges of your current stage, because if you're going to continue to grow and evolve, those challenges only get more complex as you get bigger. And so you have to learn how to handle the current challenges first. And the goal would be to get the organization to stay at kind of a prime and to avoid premature death that some of these things could cause. And so we're really looking at the balance between two major factors, flexibility and controllability. As again, similar to human development, a baby is extremely flexible, but has very little controls, that can't control most of their bodily functions. But as you continue to develop as a human being, you do get more control, but that you do give up some flexibility as you go. And that's the same with an organization. And a very young startup organization is extremely flexible, and it needs to be, with very little controls. But as that organization continues to grow, you need to put in more controls and more systems, but that does come at the cost of some flexibility. And so the key is, how do you find that balance between the two? And so those are the main things we're going to be looking at today. And so in this graph of an organizational life cycle, the left side is all about growth, and then the other side is aging. We're not going to talk about the right side of the aging at all today, nor have I spent much time with organizations in that category. Most of my time has been with growing organizations and how do we get them out of adolescence. Most of our time will be on the adolescence stage, because like on human development, that's one of the most difficult transitions we need to make. But I will go through each of the other growth stages very quickly to talk about the normal challenges versus the abnormal. So any of you that have ever been in a startup organization, these should sound very familiar to you. Commitment was that first stage. So the predictable challenges that pretty much any startup would have before they get going is the founder is very obsessed with that idea and the future possibilities, and they're very excited about it. But it's very normal that they're lacking financing. The founder is out selling the idea to everybody they can, building commitment, and they are kind of a driven profit for that idea. But they need to learn the game. I mean, how does an organization work? How do I get funding? How do I run an organization? And the organization is actually born when risk is undertaken. You move out of commitment when that person stops their day job, or they get a loan, or they've gotten funding, and they actually take off in the organization and get it started. Those are very predictable. Now, the unhealthy problems would be at this very early stage is if that founder is not really keeping an eye on reality. They're obsessed with this idea, but is there really a need for that idea? And if the founder is very profit driven, instead of being a driven profit, they are very focused on profit and money and funding and so forth. Or the founder won't listen to reason of others and lack understanding of cash flow. We all know that that's the bloodline of any organization. So those are things that, if those are jumping out at you, those need to be dealt with right away before it really takes off. But once there is commitment, and the organization immediately jumps into infancy. And again, the predictable challenges there are that growth is a top priority. It's time to act. You know, you've given up your day job. Maybe you've had another partner or some people involved. You've got maybe some debt or some funding. It is time to just get going. It's very highly centralized, usually around that one or two people that founded the organization. There are very little policies and systems, nor does there need to be. Everyone is doing it. So there's inconsistent performance. And again, these are predictable challenges, but they're very normal because you've just got to get going. And it's very opportunity driven. So often there's excessive commitments. You know, you promise more than you can really do. There's a very shoestring operation, and the founder's commitment is continually being tested. So these are just things that happen as an organization. Anybody that's been in a startup, you can probably relate to those in that infancy stage. But the unhealthy problems come in. What you need to watch for is if undercapitalization is the number one reason an organization of any kind would have a premature death. It costs a lot more to keep things going than everybody often feels. You know, the money goes out faster than it comes in. Or too early, trying to force MBA practices and long-range planning and putting in systems. Those kinds of things will come later, but early on, it really is time to act and just get the organization moving. It won't be a long-term if you don't get the short-term success under your belt. or if the founder's commitment starts to falter. I mean, that is the driving factor of this startup organization. And if they start to falter, this could be a real challenge of a premature death for the organization. So those are the few things to look for in that infancy stage. As I mentioned, I'll go through these fairly quickly because it's the adolescent stage that I want to spend most of our time on, which is where most of the organizations have real problems. But if you get through the infancy, then you usually hit a growth spurt with the next stage of development for an organization. Not only you're surviving, but you're actually flourishing. You're really doing well. It's working. But that too has its growing pains. And so the predictable challenges are that you probably have too many priorities. You're spreading yourself thin. You're very busy. You're organized around the people you have, not specific tasks that need to be done. You're equating sales or growth to success. Just because you're growing, you think that means success when it very well may not be. You begin to see a need for more control and systems. All of a sudden you're going, wow, we really don't have standards for this, or we really don't have a way to train people on something, and you start seeing that need. The founder usually starts to attempt at least to delegate because they realize they can't do it all any longer, and that becomes a challenge. People's capabilities differ. Maybe their compensation might differ because it all just kind of happened serendipitously as the organization has grown. And there's not any time to weed out incompetence. You just kind of put up with it because things are going well overall. So those are challenges, and have to be dealt with, but they're very predictable. If you're in that growth spurt, you can count on those things probably happening. But then this next chart, there's more of that chronic problems, things that would need to be dealt with fairly quickly, or there's going to be a bigger problem. And because you're growing and doing so well, arrogance can seem to set in from the top. Hey, my idea did work. I knew I was right. This is great. Nobody can tell me what to do because it's going so well. And also you get this yo-yo effect where a founder could be in control and out of control. They try to delegate, but then they take it back. And that causes a lot of disruption in the growing organization. Do I make a decision? Do I not? Do I have to leave it up to them? And the founder tends to want to delegate, but then they don't do it the way they would do it, so they take it back. And those are very common but unhealthy problems. And so you get this kind of decision paralysis. People don't know, are they supposed to make the decisions? Are they supposed to wait for the founder to make a decision? But then they get bogged down. Or the opposite happens. They try to decentralize decision making and let other people take the controls of certain areas, but there's no controls or standards in place, and so everybody's just doing their own thing. And you also could start getting deaf to these warning signs of things that because there's so much activity, so much growth, nobody's stepping back and saying, wait a minute, we need to address some of this stuff, or it's going to be a problem. So those are the unhealthy problems in the growth spurt, which brings us now to a major portion of what I wanted to share today. Up until this point, anybody, like I say, that's been part of a growing organization or startup is probably very used to those things. Once you get into adolescence, this is the point when I was doing full-time management consulting. This is usually when a consultant or somebody is brought in because it is not the same organization. You hear the leaders say, boy, this just isn't the same organization it used to be. I feel I'm losing control. And I tell them, yep, you're right on both accounts. It's not the same organization and you are losing control. And I think adolescence is an appropriate term because it's no longer a small organization, but they do not have the systems and controls of a larger organization yet. And so they're simply not, but because you have grown so tremendously, you're just not the same organization you used to be, and so you need to manage differently. And you're also kind of just caught in that middle between, the same with the adolescent child. I mean, you're being told what to do your entire life up until a certain point when you're supposed to start making your own decisions. And when you're caught in between, that can be a very challenging time. And it's the same with an organization, always being told what to do by the founder and the top leaders and so forth. But as it continues to grow and delegation occurs, people have to start making their own decisions. But what do they base that on? And so you start getting a lot of conflict in this adolescent stage. It's just, like I say, is why these growing organizations usually seek help. Growth isn't the problem as far as their normal operations. I mean, it means they're growing as well, but internally there becomes a lot of conflict. You got the old timers versus the newcomers, those that grew up with the organization, going through all the things we just described earlier. and the newcomers just coming in thinking this is crazy, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we have these systems in place? Why don't we do this? The founder might bring in an operations manager, and they're going to want to do things differently than the founder did. And so you have a lot of this conflict. Even the founder themselves is starting to resent that maybe some systems are being put in place, or that they're being told what to do to be consistent with the organization. So conflict becomes a critical issue in adolescent stage. So what are those predictable challenges again in adolescence? As I mentioned, conflict and inconsistency is paramount. There's been so much growth and lack of systems that there's just not a lot of consistency, and people are starting to have this us against them mentality. Again, these are not easy challenges to get through, but they're not uncommon. They're very predictable because you are bringing in new people that didn't grow up with the organization. They have a very different perspective than those that grew it from scratch. And you start to realize specialization is required. Maybe I do need somebody that's dedicated to fundraising, or that's dedicated to marketing, before everybody just did everything. There's now an emphasis on systems and policies because there's numerous people now in the organization, and we can't just have everybody doing everything their own way, but we haven't really written any systems or policies. Past behaviors may not be relevant any longer to this current stage of the organization's growth. There's too many unproductive meetings. There's a reduction in that growth or sales pace because we're all trying to figure this out internally now. And maybe people are starting to not hear go, go, go anymore. They're hearing no, 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 we can't take all that on. We got to do something differently. And this becomes a very difficult part in adolescence. The founder starts becoming subject to the organization, where the founder drove everything before. Now you're building an organization with systems and policies, and the founder, like everybody else, needs to follow those systems and policies. Very difficult challenge. But these are all predictable. You will run across these when you get to adolescent stage of your growth. But to avoid premature death of the organization, these are the unhealthy challenges you want to overcome quickly if you see these showing up. If it's the founder that's the first one to violate all these new policies, which unfortunately I see quite frequently, yeah, we need all these systems and practices in place, but that's for everybody else, not me, the founder. I know what I'm doing, and that sends the wrong message to everybody. So that's an unhealthy thing to watch for. And if we do still continue running the organization through intuition versus looking at the data and the systems that are being put in place, if we still have this quick fix mentality, which was maybe required in the earlier stages, now we need to get a little more serious about true solutions. If there's a refusal to delegate, or everybody sees problems, but they're all blaming the other areas, well, that's the other departments are having problems, not us. So you get a lot of the blame game going on. And so then that starts to cause a loss of trust and respect within the organization. And I hate to say it, but you do see this quite often because of this conflict that adolescence brings. The us and them does start breaking down that trust. And so if it starts getting, this transition starts turning into a revolution, we really got a problem. But I've actually seen that actually in churches and nonprofits as well as other businesses. And if those entrepreneurs or those earlier people that really are the creative entrepreneurs start exiting, that too is a huge problem because you don't want to lose that. As I mentioned earlier, this is a stage where you're putting more controls in place, but we can't lose that flexibility either. We have to find that balance. So you don't want all the operations managers to take over and the entrepreneurs leaving. That could be extremely unhealthy. So those are the unhealthy problems. But at this stage of adolescence, leadership itself is also in a huge critical transition point, and this becomes one of the major issues because the leadership that's required at this point is not the same as the leadership required earlier. Before, you needed that visionary, that driven prophet, who maybe knows technically whatever your organization is doing, knows it like the back of their hand, they're driving it. But now the leadership that's required is somebody that is focused on establishing systems and policies and best practices and consistency. That's a whole different set of skills than being a visionary and a technical expert in a particular area. Up to this point, it's more is better, work harder, everybody jump in and just work. Well, now it's stepping back and kind of saying, wait a minute, let's step back, better is more. Let's work smarter. Let's get practices in place and systems that we can all follow. And that leader is moving from the sole decision maker to more of an enabler of others and a delegator. And as you can see, these are very contrasting skill sets. And so the very person that was required during the earlier stages, those traits might, to some degree, be detrimental at this point. And so there's a different skill set needed. And so there's usually a dilemma here in leadership when we get to adolescence of any organization. And so there is truly an organizational transformation. It's kind of a rebirth at this point. And that's why I'm spending so much time on adolescence. It's kind of the gist of this whole discussion. This is when a company or an organization or a church or nonprofit, if they don't get through this piece of it, is when it starts to decline, because as it continues to grow, that one person or two people that have founded it, run it, if that things don't change, they will burn out. The organization will start to burn out. And so it's a very transformational, critical time if there's going to be continued growth and success to Prime. And so where there's been this allegiance to the person all this time, we all signed up because we agree with this founder and we do everything he says, he or she says. Now it's more of an allegiance to the organization, to the purpose. Hey, I buy into what the purpose of the organization is. Whether that leader is here or not, my allegiance is to this organization and to the values and vision of this organization. And so it is kind of a rebirth away from all the focus on that founder and driver of the start to the organization. And it's the shared values and vision and systems that now drive everyone, not just that particular individual. This is an extremely difficult time if anybody's been through this. And so the leadership requirements here, one of two things has to happen. Either that particular leader has to truly transform and develop into somebody that's now working on the business as much as working in the business, becoming this leader that we just talked about, or this is very frequently the time that a new leader is brought in. Somebody that has those skills. They're more operational skills and systems thinking and delegation and enabling. Very often someone is brought in to do that, and the current founder is used in a different capacity or moves on to do it again somewhere else. And I've seen both. I think the first one is more difficult in getting the person to actually become a different type of leader, but it's also very difficult to bring in a new leader. So one of those two things has to happen, because now that leader is required to work on the business, not just in it. Inspiring a shared vision with clear goals, aligning the people, developing those systems to accomplish these goals, and understanding what the needs are of the organization at this particular stage in its life cycle. Equipping, enabling, encouraging others, not just doing the work and telling people what to do. And so leaders are then focusing on present problems so that the organization can continue to learn and mature, because we need to free up energy for the next stage. And that's really one of the crux of understanding this entire sequence of how an organization develops, is that we need to solve these problems and challenges, because the next stage, as we get bigger, as we grow, the challenges only get more complex. And so if we don't figure them out at this stage, that's where premature death happens. It's kind of like, if we don't fix these very predictable challenges or the abnormal challenges that we are experiencing right now, we will totally self-destruct when we get even bigger. So the leader has to prepare the organization by focusing on the current challenges and prepare them for the next more demanding stage, to prevent causes of aging or continuously rejuvenating the organization. So healthy growth is really that ability to deal with bigger and more complex problems later on. And you can only do that by understanding how these have to be dealt with currently, the current challenges. So that brings us to Prime. And I can spend a lot of time here, but that obviously is the optimum point where you've really sought that balance between flexibility and self-control. Okay, we still have our entrepreneurial spirit, we still have that driving factor of why we started what we're doing, but now we have more controls in place as a bigger organization. That doesn't mean you're stable, because if you look at that original graph I showed you, stable was at top, Prime was actually below it, because you're always developing, you're always improving. Stable, you start to get complacent. And so you're not trying to be stable, you're trying to always be in prime, where you have that unique blend of flexibility and control. Where the organization now, the managers and people within that organization, they know what they're doing, where they're going, how to get there, is no longer evolving around that founder or entrepreneur. And the vision and the aggressiveness that was all going on during that growth stage, added with the controls and the predictability that were added during the adolescent stage, that's what puts you into the prime, the optimum place you want to be. And just as a caution, prime doesn't mean you've arrived. As I just mentioned earlier, you're still growing and developing. Development's a process, not just a destination. So the challenge is to stay at prime. Have we institutionalized our vision and creativity? Do we have the right functional systems and structure? We still have to be satisfying our customers or market, whatever we are working on. We have to remain relevant. Things change around the organization all the time. Are we remaining relevant? And are we being predictable in our performance? As I mentioned, and so that's pretty much takes us all the way through that growth side, the left side of the chart, the developmental stages of an organization. The aging side is more, have not spent a lot of time there, where you move into bureaucracies and so on, where the organizations have now gone the other direction. Very large organizations, and you can probably think of a few that you've had to deal with, where it's all about controls and they've totally lost their flexibility, and it's just the rules. Everybody has to follow the rules, and that's just the way it is, and no more free thinking. That also causes death in an organization at some point. But all my time has been with helping growing companies, so just wanted you to be aware that that's the flip side of letting the controls take too much over the organization and losing your flexibility. So just kind of as we wrap up, you've heard it before, the foundation to withstand continuous improvement, continuous development. There needs to be a common purpose in the organization where the organization shares those vision and values. It can't all just be captured in that entrepreneur or founder any longer. Willingness to face those brutal facts. That's one of the problems I run into quite frequently. They really see issues, but they just don't want to challenge them because that's not the way we normally do things. You have to face the brutal facts and develop through this organizational life cycle, and then have a planned implementation. If you're clear on what's going on and you hold people accountable to make it happen, there will be results. So just to summarize, the requirements of your people, of your systems, and your leadership change as the organization grows. And those are difficult challenges, but there's predictable things and there are abnormal or unhealthy challenges. And to know the difference is critical so that you know to take immediate action on those chronic problems. Developmental growth involves a changing relationship between flexibility and control, and you're trying to seek that balance. Very flexible when you're young, and you need to be. As the organization gets larger and more complex, more controls are needed, but you don't want to go too far. Leaders are not going to eliminate any of these problems we just talked about, but they need to ensure the organization has the right skills and the right systems to solve the right problems at the right stage of the organization so that they can continue to develop to the more complex stage after this one. So that's kind of the content that I wanted to share. I guess we can move into questions.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So if anyone has questions, feel free to jump in or type them in the chat and I can read them off as well. But Mike, it was so interesting, just the things that you were saying. And I think a lot of us are pretty much kind of like in the infancy going to the adolescent stages, as you were saying. So I guess my question would be more like how do you identify those things? And then, I mean, granted that you did go over those things, but I guess how do you address between like old comers and newcomers, if there are, I guess, heads butting, how do you, I guess, healthily grow and have them work together, even as newcomers have a different insight, and then old comers have been with the organization for a while, and does that make sense?
Well, I mean, obviously, as I said, that's a very normal challenge. It gets unhealthy when you don't overcome them. And so the key is that oftentimes it's the people that grew up with the organization that are not letting go. This is the classic, we've always done it this way. And then you bring a newcomer that might have came from a bigger organization that's very used to having systems and policies and practices in place, and they're just kind of dumbfounded that I can't believe we don't do this or have that, and that gets resented by the people currently there. And so I'd say that one, the newcomers have to be a little patient. If you understand this dynamic, and it's not, you take it away from a personal conflict, because obviously that's what it turns into. And you say, this is the chaos, this is the challenge we are in right now, where we have all these people that have done it a certain way and have been very successful. And now you got these newcomers who have great ideas and they might have experience with the next stage. At least let's first admit that that dynamic is occurring, and it's not just Joe against Sarah that they just don't get along. It's the situation that has caused the problem. Now let's back up and understand what are those things that are still very relevant from the past that we want to save and not lose. But on the other hand, we know now that we have to get more systems and practices in place and policies and more standardization. Both sides see that if you understand this organizational development. Okay, which are the pieces now that we need to start implementing? And so we have to just take it away from a personal conflict to it's an organizational development stage that we just have to get through. And you will take the best of both. Make sure you keep some of the flexibility and the key parts of the earlier organization, but also we do need to, as we've just identified, you do need to change. You do need to add some more controls and standards and so forth. Well, which are the ones we're going to implement at a given time. So I'm not saying this is an easy discussion, but you have to get it away from a personal conflict, which is where most people go. They think, oh, I just don't get along with so-and-so. I don't like this new operations manager, or these people from the past, they're just out of touch. We have to get away from that and just talk about, this is a challenge of this stage. Now let's keep the best of both moving forward. I don't know, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Thank you so much. We have a question from Ali, currently in Lebanon. Thank you so much for being on the call with us today. So the question is, I am part of a Christian organization that has suddenly grown into multiple global projects. The question is, I feel that people are still following the founder instead of following the organization's vision and mission. What is the assessment of such a situation and how to tend to it at this stage?
And what role is this particular person? So this is not the founder, I take it?
No. Let me check.
Because this is where the biggest challenge comes in, is it's the founder, that driver, that has to be the one that is understands all of this and realizes that they cannot still demand that kind of allegiance to him personally or her, and but if they're the ones that are violating or not allowing the practices to be followed because he or she wants to have the final say, that becomes an issue. So if you're saying you already have those standards and policies in place for everybody throughout the globe to follow, that's square one. But then the second issue would be that founder has to now abide by that. If he doesn't, that becomes one of those abnormal challenges that if we don't get that fixed, that could be a real issue. And the founder has to understand that, and maybe have to be coached through that through a presentation like this. Get them to understand why it's so critical that you can't just keep driving everything and have the people think they can just talk to you for their direction, because that will self-destruct. The organization won't continue on to the next stage if they don't get past that.
Got it. Ali said they are the global program manager, one of the new members. So,
okay.
Another question I have is, so as you continue on, whether you're in the adolescent stage or the infant stage, do you ever see this this time of like stagnancy? Like, no, it's not. You're doing the things that you're doing in your organization, and then you're growing little by little, but then it's just kind of like, it's just kind of stagnant. Have you ever seen?
Oh, sure, obviously, but I mean, obviously this was geared at more the pains of growth. And what you're saying is what happens when you're not growing, which is probably an entirely different conversation. But one of the reasons, it all depends why. And one of those reasons could be the things we just talked about, that if they're not addressing some of the challenges we've talked about, that will cause you to stagnate. Now, without knowing the organization, I have no way of knowing. It could be you're going after the wrong market, you don't have something that people are interested in. I mean, I have no idea. But in the context of this conversation, if in fact you don't get those systems in place, or if you are not addressing the challenges we've talked about, that will cause you to stagnate, because you can only do so much. The founder or driver, if you're still in that model, they only physically can do so much, and once you've hit that capacity, you're not going to get much bigger. And your people can only do so much. And so that's one of the advantages of getting these controls and standards and policies in place, is that you can continue to grow, and you're not able to if everything's still, everybody's just working hard. You can only work so hard. You need to work smarter and develop the organization so the organization can handle that growth. So again, I have no idea if that's the reason, but you need to dive in and find out what's causing the stagnation before you can address it. It may be some of these issues.
Thank you. Mike Falkenstein just written a question. He says that we are a small staff team of a growing nonprofit. Is there a general rule you have about when to begin hiring new staff to take over projects that the founder was previously doing?
Boy, no, I do not have a rule of thumb. I mean, it would be so different for every organization, and that's, I guess it all depends on what of these things are happening. I mean, is that founder, is it too much for them to handle? Are they not effectively doing the projects well? Because early on, in a very early stage, that is the most efficient way to get things done. But if you are now sensing some of these challenges occurring, then delegation does need to occur, and you bring more people in. But if you're still in infancy stage, whoever's on board, you probably only have enough work to keep everybody busy. But once you start, I guess it's like any hiring decision, once you have too much work for the people you have, you would need to add more people. The challenge will become if that founder, even if you add people and the founder doesn't let go, that becomes the unhealthy problem.
Any other questions from any other participants? I want to keep asking questions because I feel like other people have just things to share. Let's see. Great. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us, Michael? In terms of just any words of encouragement as we're continuing to grow in our organizations. Yeah, just lots of information that you shared today, which has been excellent.
Well, I think, I mean, a lot of I do work with nonprofits and churches quite a bit, but a lot of my background is in the business world. But I found it very interesting in biblical reading. Moses obviously had the same challenge. Some people say Jethro, his father-in-law, was the first management consultant. Kind of came in and said, what you're doing is not good. Here you have God's called servant, very good at what he does, but he just needed some practical advice on how to run an organization. And the disciples ran into the same problem in the early church as it grew, where all of a sudden they had to create new positions and delegate differently. And it's just a common occurrence as you continue to grow and add more people. You just have to step back and realize we cannot operate the way we used to. This is not good. We have to do it differently. And I've found so often in many organizations that I talk to or have consulted with or grown, that's what I might now consider kind of common sense, is just not, because you get so caught up in the actual activity and what your organization is trying to accomplish that you don't step back and say, wait a minute, we need to rethink how we run, working on the organization, not just in it, not just doing the tasks of the organization, but is there a way to get more efficient in what we do and to delegate more effectively and to get more specialization? Somebody's got to step back and say it's time to change, and that's usually that doesn't happen until the wheels are starting to fall off the bus. So if you can be aware of that ahead of time, you can nip off some of these issues ahead, and it isn't as so critical a stage to make the improvements. And I see it in every organization. I always thought churches wouldn't have these problems. Churches have major problems in these areas because you have the spiritual leaders who are fantastic at what they do, but when they start getting very big budgets and big organizations and staff, they really have difficulty in making this transition out of this adolescent stage.
Sounds good. Yeah, I really enjoyed just what you shared about the flexibility and controllability and how you had to find that balance as you grow as an organization, and just identifying what those challenges are, what those growth pains are, and just being able to really work as a team, and even as a leader, founder, CEO, president, just really being able to decide, okay, do I hand this off to someone else? How do I delegate these responsibilities? Do I have someone specific to lead a certain part of the organization, or this title and so forth? So I really enjoyed just everything that you've shared with us today. If there's any other questions, feel free to email me or the group. And do you mind if we share a PDF version of your PowerPoint just so that they can have this on hand?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that'll be great. It's just excellent, wonderful. And then I'll probably share your email as well, just so that if people have questions, they can contact.
It's actually on the bottom of the charts there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for being on the train with us today. And I'll be sending up a follow-up email just with a link to the YouTube channel once it's updated. And also, we have one more training coming up in October, and it's the Art of Creating Donor Environments with Steve Caliper. So if you're interested in that, feel free to email me as well. So thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone else. Have a great day, guys.
Okay, thanks. Best of luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you.